Okay, so today we have Marc Mandel, Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Exos, which is a leading company in human performance and employee wellness. Marc has built a distinguished career transforming legal departments into strategic business partners. He's not only helped close large transactions and expand international operations across 15 plus countries, but also fostered a top-ranked legal team known for its engagement and continuous learning culture. A founding member of the L Suite, formerly known as Tech GC, Marc has been a champion for knowledge sharing and community within the legal industry. His leadership combines sharp business acumen with a passion for mentorship and innovation, making him a true force at the intersection of law, business, and technology. Marc, it's great to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So let's start by talking a little bit about your current role at Exos. Why don't you tell us a bit about the company and what your roles and responsibilities look like?
Sure. Exos is a human performance company. We help historically professional athletes get the very best achievements and to really meet their performance potential, and have quite a bit of research and methodology developed around that, which we bring to corporate clients as well. And so a large part of our business is working with large enterprise clients and helping them to design, equip, and most importantly, staff fitness spaces with Exos coaches, and to help translate our methodology to everyday business folks who want to do their best in work.
Do you focus in the executive tier primarily within the corporate culture, or is it really top to bottom?
No, it's very democratic. We are sort of running soup to nuts the wellness programs at our clients. And so generally every employee will have access to the services that we offer. And that includes not only in the US, in-person, remote services through an app for people who aren't going into an office every day, and also in countries outside the US. Companies, to their credit, have been very keen on having a parity of benefits with US employees and non-US staff. So that's been a legal challenge as we foray into more countries, but for the right reason.
Yeah. And so your legal team at Exos, can you tell us a little about who you're working with on the legal side?
Sure. We're a relatively small department for approximately a 3,000 person organization. We're 5 team members. We have one paralegal, a legal ops professional, and 2 lawyers besides myself. So it's a lot to keep us busy, and we have a lot of subsidiaries and sideline businesses. It's not purely sort of wellness services for companies and athletes, but there's a whole bunch of adjacency to that, which is on brand for us, but generates a lot of varied legal work.
And so how do you divvy up the legal work from your in-house team to your outside counsel partners? What do you primarily handle internally?
We try to handle as much as we can. There are certain things that we won't touch at all, like taxation or immigration, but sort of on the ground aspects of litigation. We will closely manage litigation, but we're not the ones writing the briefs and making appearances. So everything commercial related, everything related to the product, to privacy, to marketing, governance, for the most part. To the extent that we've been acquisitive or have made divestitures, depending on the transaction size, that's something we would do either in-house or with an outside partner.
Wow, that's great. So how did you get to Exos? Why don't you give us kind of high level overview of where your career started and how it progressed?
Sure. I don't know how far back you want to go. But before law school, I had a sort of a brief career that was during the dot-com boom and bust in technology and in operations management. And then sort of one too many tech company busts led me back to grad school. So I was class of 06 for law school, joined this wonderful old Wall Street law firm with 160-year-old history, and thought that I really had job security at that point. And that was right before 2008. The firm was Thatcher Profit, and the clients of the firm that were the biggest were Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. And so that ended up being sort of one of the larger meltdowns, and again, sort of went off. And that was a great network. I sort of moved between a few law firms after that based on relationships I had made at the first firm. And then I was recruited out of the law firm sort of on the eve of partnership. I decided that an offer for equity in a private equity backed company was a good trade for equity in a law firm partnership. And so I left as a ninth year associate to become the first general counsel at an advertising technology company. We grew that quite quickly, sold it, took a job in the smart home devices industry as my next stop, and then again was recruited out of that company to Exos by a recruiter who had a compelling story for me that I thought I could make a good impact here, and luckily that's turned out to be the case.
And how long have you been at Exos?
3 years.
3 years. So you've transformed the legal team into a flexible business partner that helps close deals and expand product capabilities. What steps did you take to make that transformation happen?
Mostly, I would say telling people on my team that it's okay to take more risk than they were comfortable with. And that's, I think, the difference between someone junior or mid-level and someone with more years of experience. Having seen many more things go right than go wrong, and having seen what can go wrong, how unpredictable that is. And so knowing that, if there's a problem, you probably can't anticipate it exactly anyway. Freeing people to move a little faster and to be a little lighter in red lines. And, the business measures us based on velocity and the feeling people get from talking with us. And so also a lot of what I do is, the lawyers on the team know how to create legal markups and to, what the issues are. But the style in which they communicate what our positions or concerns are is absolutely huge from an appearance standpoint in front of our own internal sales team, for example, as the audience, and also in persuading the business person on the other end of the line who's there with their legal team, right? If you can come from a place of common sense rather than a legal argument, you'll get the counterpart on the other side advocating for our position and saying to their lawyers, that makes sense to me. And if you can get, into that sort of cycle, you can really move a lot faster, and people appreciate that work.
What kind of advice do you find yourself giving primarily your attorneys in that respect, working on tone and approach to practical lawyering?
You can always find a positive way to say something. A lot of times, your instinct is to say, we can't do that, right? And they have good reasons that we can't do that. But, say instead, we can do this, right? There is something else. Yeah. And so just lead with that is really transformative in a way that shifts people's mindset on the receiving end, because now you're winning them over rather than sticking your hand out.
Yeah. So how do you define success for an in-house legal team, and have you measured it, and if so, how?
I think it's really hard to measure quantitatively. Some legal departments would have a service level agreement for their attorneys. If we get an NDA, we're going to turn that around in 24 hours. If we have a professional services agreement, we'll give that 4 business days, this kind of thing. We don't have that here, and for me, that's really by design. One, because of the team size and the variety of the work. It's one agreement is not really comparable to another, even if they have the same title. But also, if we made, for example, turnaround time our number one priority, then that's what we would get is turnaround time, and something else would suffer. And I want people to be empowered to use their judgment about what's needed to do the right thing for the business. And so, for me, it's soft factors, right? If I'm getting good feedback about the team from the product team, from the marketing team, from the sales team, and that I solicit, that's great, because if you ask, people will be happy to share with you much more. If you ask someone to fill out a survey with metrics or rankings, we keep track of a little bit of these things for ourselves to benchmark against as we introduce new process and technology, but that's not something that I rate my own team on or that even we share with other departments.
Yeah, that makes sense. So your legal team at Exos was ranked #1 in team engagement in 2022. What do you think are some key factors that contributed to that success?
So that actually is a based on a Qualtrics survey that they give to departments across the company, and so those are self-reported metrics that essentially mean that our team was very happy and engaged. Part of that may just be because we have a smaller team, and so I have the capacity to be very close with everyone on the team, and we really do gel very well, and so I think everyone is sort of happy to show up to work, and that's got to be a big part of satisfaction. Some of it's management style, though, I think, right? If you know Daniel Pink, he's a business author and writer who writes about how people are motivated and mastery, autonomy, and purpose being kind of the three levers that will help someone to do their best intrinsically rather than, based on some external reward. That resonates really well with me. And so I incorporate as much of that as I can, and I think that's been successful and sort of come through in how happy people are. I'll give you one example, right?
Yeah.
I don't have a standing one-on-one with anybody on the team. I feel like if your boss sends you a regular meeting invite, then you have to show up with something to say to make to prove that you've been busy, and that begins to feel like accountability and that I don't, maybe trust them to have been working on the right things. Instead, I say, call me when you want to talk about anything. And I probably talk to everybody on the team every day. No reason to save things up for a pre-programmed appointment where, I don't know, it feels like you have to show up with a list. So
Right.
I think people just appreciate that level of accessibility and trust.
How senior are the members on your team? Maybe start with primarily the attorneys.
Yeah. So there's, I think, one fifth-year attorney and one seventh or eighth year. And they're both quite versatile and, they come to me for advice to help them, but I also fully trust them if they're not coming to me for advice about things. And that's great, right? Like the fewer questions I get, I'm not bothered by questions, but I know that the work is going to be good either way. So if they're not asking me questions, then I know that there are good things happening without my being involved, which is super that, I hear about it after it's done.
What approach have you taken to recruiting attorneys? What do you look for? And where have you found success?
So generalists for sure, right? We're too small of a team to have somebody that's only focused on privacy law or commercial contracts, right? If someone's out on PTO, I want a pool of people that can fill in for them. I want everyone to know each other's jobs as best as they can. So we can all support each other. And so that's what I look for is, curiosity about doing a lot of different things rather than domain specific knowledge, right? I would take sort of smarts and curiosity any day over someone who had a very similar role at a similar company as their previous engagement. So that's what's been attractive to me in interviewing.
Yeah. As a leader, how do you approach mentoring and fostering continuous learning within your team?
Looking for new assignments where someone has not had a particular experience. Definitely asking and listening very carefully. If someone's willing to tell me what they want to work on, that's amazing feedback, and I will always find them a way to get that kind of assignment. And, for example, some associates or some of the team members hadn't come through a traditional law firm, and so they didn't have any experience forming a new company, right? That's a very basic sort of first year task at a law firm, but if you haven't done that, that's interesting to know sort of from the ground up.
So you've had significant success supporting international expansion. What are the key legal challenges when scaling operations in new markets, and how have you approached them?
International operation is really hard. It sounds silly and obvious, but every country gets to make their own laws, and you often, can't assume much from one jurisdiction to another. And in particular, everything seems to take much longer outside the US than inside the US. We seem to be sort of blessed in that regard as having relatively little bureaucracy. So one should be prepared to not move as quickly. I would also say, start with a partner, right? You can have a branch, or you can register an existing entity, to pay tax, let's say, in a foreign country without having a full subsidiary there, without being an employer of record. So when we have some volume of business, a client will take us to another country. They'll ask us to, provide our fitness services. We will use a employer of record as a third party partner to help put people on their payroll, but at our behest. And so administratively, that's just a much easier place to start. You have to be careful because that's expensive. And if you're not experienced, you'll find your margins are not very good on the international business because the compliance burden is so high. And so you really have to understand that either you're doing that for, you're going international for a real strategic reason, or, you better price it accordingly. And then look, in many jurisdictions, it's not so easy to get out either, right? Both from a personnel standpoint, or from an entity standpoint. So you should also be prepared to provide sort of long severance periods, notice periods, sort of be wise to things being difficult, on the front end, on the back end, and make sure you really have good reason to go before you go.
Yeah. Have you, how have you found success making relationships with outside counsel in the local jurisdictions? Is it largely through word of mouth? Or are you a member of an organization that connects you with those folks?
For sure. If the need is like very casual or sporadic, I might go to the local office of our sort of large international outside counsel, but that's not my preference for where we're going to have some ongoing presence. I want to, find a 5-person firm. And, you mentioned L Suite at the top of the call. For sure, that's been a tremendous resource for finding people who are good in different jurisdictions. I'm also a part of a lawyer a lawyer entrepreneur WhatsApp group that someone from LinkedIn just said, "Hey, I'm putting this WhatsApp group together." And actually, so last time I had need about a month or so ago to start work in India, I hit up that WhatsApp group of other sort of legal founders, and I got a fantastic recommendation for someone who's been very helpful to us there. So
that's great.
Lots of different ways to network. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've played a key role in corporate development, joint ventures, and partnerships. What legal and strategic considerations do you prioritize when advising on those types of transactions?
I have seen a lot of partnerships that don't end up yielding much fruit. If it works well, it can be fantastic. But by the numbers, I would say more likely than not, there's a lot of fanfare and then maybe fizzle after that. And so from that experience, what I usually counsel is don't put this grand agreement in place because you think there's opportunities to go sell together. Go sell together. And when you have a deal, let's make the partnership agreement at that time that will help us sell a real deal. And then the issues will be much more concrete than what if type questions. Relationships are incredibly important, that having that level of trust. If you can find someone through your network rather than someone not, that'll just make everything a lot easier. And then, on the back end, if the sands move under you somehow, I worry more about my client being able to exit a partnership sort of quickly than us being kicked out of something that's healthy and productive. You
Yeah.
can't keep someone in a relationship if they don't want to be there anyway. So I would rather have the power to sort of quit easily.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's great.
those are some factors.
Yeah. You've implemented legal ops technology to create efficient service platforms. What tools or strategies have you found most effective in streamlining legal operations?
One big unlock for us was having our legal intake system connected to our contract lifecycle management system. So previously we had a homegrown Google form that people would fill out with the type of legal support they needed, and then a separate contract management system. In the last 18 months or so, we've tied those together, unified them under one platform. And I mean, that's been great because a lot of the information you capture at the start of an assignment ends up being able to be fed into a finished contract as metadata. And so you're not sort of copying from one place to another. The records are much more self-keeping that way. And then it gives people one portal, whether they're looking for an executed contract or looking for help with something new, having a sort of one-stop shop for the, the internal clients has been helpful as
So
well.
did you move to an entirely different platform, or did you just integrate your intake platform with your prior CLM platform?
No, we move platforms altogether. We're using a platform now called Legal Sifter, which has integrated front end and CLM capabilities that are tied together, and they are, maybe not as well known as an Ironclad or a Link Squares, but I think they're up and coming, and they've developed a really good tool. And we were, as sort of a more entrepreneurial team ourselves, it felt good for us to work with a smaller company that was more responsive to our needs. And
Yeah.
so that product in some part has been shaped around sort of what we could use. And then, to the extent that's useful for others, that's made it into the product on more than one occasion. So that's been a nice partnership.
Yeah, that's great. How do you see legal technology evolving in the next few years, and where should legal departments focus their innovation efforts?
You couldn't answer that question in 2024 without using the AI catchphrase. And
Yeah.
and I like it. It's been promised in law for a long time, and I think it was really under-delivered for 10 years ago. People were talking about automatic metadata extraction or negotiation assistance, and it was very clumsy or just not accurate enough, right? It like reminds me a little bit of like what OCR used to be if you were trying to scan a document and convert it to text, and it was 99% accurate. That meant that, one out of every 100 characters was wrong. And so we sort of caught up now to a point where if you train an AI system on your own documents that are your forms and you have a playbook for, they are quite useful today. I think the next step is being able to have that level of assistance for an arbitrary document that's not on your paper and that's, coming into you from a, client or a partner who's insisting on using their own form, and getting red line assistance against that. And then,
Mhm.
this is a little bit more distant in the future, but I think that some of the negotiation itself, rather than just the redlining, will be kind of the last piece that removes some of the, I think, least interesting and strategic work from a lawyer's day.
Yeah. And so can you provide some examples of how you've implemented AI at Exos?
Yeah, for sure. We're working with a few different tools. One of them is just the regular Chat GPT, the Teams edition, the sort of the privacy terms and the confidentiality terms are sort of good enough with, as long as you're paying for the product, that we have not had a problem using that with the legal department.
Mhm.
And we've gotten a lot of value out of it. I'll give you just an example of something that's a little bit creative or clever. It sounds complicated, but we've made a custom GPT for ourselves, which is actually not that much more difficult than kind of creating a new folder in Google Drive or the Chat GPT equivalent, but opening up a new window and and dragging a bunch of documents that you want it to keep in mind as context for future questions. And so in our case, it was about insurance. Insurance is a neat area because you have maybe 20 insurance policy documents that are pretty dense and difficult to understand, but everything you need to know about your insurance coverage theoretically should just be in that one set of documents. And so we've trained this custom GPT to understand that body of documents. And now we can go to a commercial contract, let's say, copy and paste the insurance provision out of that into this custom trained GPT and say, do we comply with this? Do we meet the limits? What do you see as problems? And get answers that are tailored to our insurance program that are pretty useful, and without without that much difficulty to set it up. So that's been one. We're using the Lexis product as well, called Lexis Create or AI Create,
Sure.
Which is a similar text-based interaction, but has the Lexis body of knowledge to call on, and that's also been helpful. We are experimenting with a tool right now called Pinsights, and that is one of the tools out there that will help redline agreements against the playbook, but it doesn't have to be for your own forms. It can be sort of like, this is how we would treat a third party's professional services agreement or NDA. And so using that to just start us off with starter red lines where we could, right click reject if we don't like them, but gaining a little bit of velocity off of that tool as well.
Yeah. So with your custom GPT that you use for the insurance review, what was the training process like? What did you have to do to get the model up to speed to be proficient?
Oh, this is very not technical. It's if you're using ChatGPT, you can push a button that says new GPT, and then you drag documents into essentially an online folder, and that becomes the context for any window that you open up to chat with, not just general ChatGPT, but I want to talk to my insurance GPT now. And it just, has that all as context.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no sort of hardcore training required.
Do you provide feedback to the custom GPT, as you use that custom GPT for, multiple insurance reviews? How do you know, not necessarily technically how it's learning, but based on the prompts and the feedback you get, is it interactive?
Yeah, for sure. It will take your past, requests to reshape a response and incorporate that into future answers, right?
Yeah.
And you can do that manually also in a way, right? So there's always standing instructions you can provide, and so we are updating what you might call the standing instructions or the system prompt to make sure that its outputs are more refined as we keep getting better or worse answers from it.
Yeah, that's great. So you've worked across ad tech, Internet of Things, software as a service, and the wellness industries. How has your approach to being a general counsel evolved in the fast-moving, tech-driven businesses?
I don't know that look, my learning and experience has evolved as I do this job for more clients, but it's being a general counsel. I often get to say, yeah, I don't know much about topic X. I'm a generalist. It's right in my title, which has always been true, no matter the company that I'm working for. So I say that usually kind of half tongue in cheek because I like to get into the details. But part of my law firm training was as an M&A lawyer, and when you're an M&A lawyer, the business of M&A is really the same, whether, you could be selling a gold mine one week and a software gaming company the next week. And the what goes into that really doesn't change from industry to industry in a way that is familiar to me now as a general counsel, in that there's a lot of continuity in the skill set.
Yeah. I found, as a former M&A lawyer myself, it was such a good training ground to get a broad exposure. I mean, you had to coordinate between the IP group, the real estate group, the labor and employment group. Even if you were just trapped in the memo, or you were consolidating the memo across the different subject matter expert groups, you were getting exposure to what the key issues were, having to think through how those key issues in your due diligence memo needed to get reflected in the purchase agreement, if at all. So it's just I think M&A in particular is a really good training ground for becoming a generalist. So what do you see as the most pressing challenges and opportunities for general counsels today?
There's constant pressure on budget. We will never not be a cost center in an organization. I wish sometimes, that were not the case, but I haven't figured out a way, to sort of flip that dynamic. So the ask is always to do more with the same or potentially with less. And so, look, large outside law firms are also now in the $2,000 an hour range for specialists. That's to me, that's still a shocking number, even though it's not an outlier anymore. And so that also, puts pressure on us to do more internally, or to not have certainly a one-stop shop outside law firm to do all the work, because it comes at that premium. And so it's a juggling act.
Yeah.
It always will be. Most of the things that I do in a day were not the things on my to-do list. I'm sure that would sound familiar to a lot of people everywhere. So it's no different from my spot.
You've overseen compliance for healthcare, data privacy, marketing regulations. With privacy laws evolving rapidly, how do you stay ahead of the curve and ensure compliance with constantly evolving regulations?
It's a lowest common denominator approach, right? Everyone sort of bemoans California as creating federal legislation, because if you have to do something for people in California, then it's easier to do it for everybody. And it's not just California, right? It's Europe. And if you combine California and Europe, I would say that gets you to, like, I don't know, 85, 90% compliance with any privacy law anywhere. And no one's at 100%, right? I guarantee you. So the question is just, work from those things that you're doing at scale, right? There are a lot of places in the organization where privacy is relevant. I'm always looking to, okay, but is this, impacting 40 people who are employees in, Texas, or is this impacting 40,000 people who are our clients, across 5 states, right? So prioritizing where we need to pay attention, and then looking out for law firm memos and alerts and that kind of thing to have some sense, going to meetups and conferences to look at what's ahead, and then just having it's just too operationally complex to have different rules for different people. And so and look, my own feeling is everybody deserves good privacy anyway, and that's really not incompatible with sort of creating shareholder value, and you can be a good privacy citizen and also be a good company that's sought after. So I like to try to bridge those things wherever I can.
Yeah. So looking back at your time at June Group, where I think you're your first in-house counsel in the ad tech industry, you played a critical role in its successful exit. What were the most valuable takeaways from that experience?
Have your bags packed at all times. Meaning we thought that it would take a few years to build that company up to a place where it was time to turn it over again. And that wasn't the case. We just sort of hit a nice window much earlier than we thought. And, because of the M&A training that I had, and I knew nothing about ad tech, by the way, the hiring philosophy that I alluded to earlier of sort of taking smart, curious generalists over industry specific. I would have never have gotten that job at June Group unless the founders there had ascribed to the same kind of hiring philosophy. And they knew that, fundamentally they were going to build it up and sell it. And I think they didn't care that I didn't know anything about ad tech, and that I could learn that on the job, but that I knew M&A, and that would be the thing that would create a lot of value. And and so look, I kept the company sort of due diligence ready as I went from the first day. Um, and so when the call came unexpectedly early, my bag was packed, and
Yeah.
we were ready to go. Have a great relationship with your CFO. Just super, super important when it comes to getting a transaction done. Um, you know, had it end up having making a friend, that that call a friend to this day, out of the June Group CFO, and so
Yeah.
definitely don't ignore those kind of relationships, and yeah, just be ready.
When you talk about being due diligence ready, can you talk little bit about how you did that? I mean, were you creating a data room internally that you were consistently, adding signed contracts to? Talk a bit about your process.
Sure. I mean, yes, I had a neat filing system, but you also know what the questions are going to be in terms of contracts, right? Is there anything that prohibits me from um, doing business in a particular place or way, right? Have you signed any type of non-compete, non-solicit? Have you given, sort of most favored nation pricing to any clients that might get impacted, if they're bringing in affiliates after sale? So that, like, I had that mental checklist, and
Yeah.
I just negotiated those things really hard, even though I didn't think I was in immediately preparing for a transaction. We just said, no, we can't do that. We got, we're going to keep that out of our agreement. Of course, change of control provisions and that kind of thing. So just giving yourself the flexibility as you negotiate and make that a today problem, not a later problem. And
Yeah.
then sure, keep good records, uh, and like know where the signed copies are. You'd be surprised when you come in to an organization, um, how if you ask them for copies of the contracts that it's Word versions that you're getting. You say, yeah, but we're really going to need the signed version of that when it comes to almost anything. So yeah, keep the
So
records.
you've navigated the transition from big law to in-house counsel and into leadership roles. What advice would you give to attorneys considering a similar career path?
I think I probably stayed in big law a few years too many. If you're sure that big law is not for you and you're just sort of looking to get to the right level of experience before you'll be useful to an in-house team, um, 5 or 6 years would be great. I think you're extremely marketable. I hung on those extra few years. Maybe that was what allowed me to go directly into a general counsel role, but and my fear was that the sort of more junior roles in house just wouldn't be that interesting, and that was sort of what kept me on the law firm track for as long as I was there. But that's not true. There really are really good senior counsel roles, for example, in house, and so don't hang on any longer than you have to if you're not having fun, at a law firm.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for taking the time being here. It's great to hear what you're doing at Exos and to hear about what you've learned over the course of your career. So we appreciate the time you spent.
Awesome, Brian. Pleasure to meet you, and hope to see you out there again.